Hi everyone and welcome to my updated Shadows Mantle Impale guide for Demon Hunters in Season 25 and onwards. So Shadows Mantle has been buffed quite a bit in Season 25 and it's actually a quite powerful build now for Demon Hunter standards. It's not like anywhere top tier in the overall categories, but it is definitely solid and usually a very nice beginner friendly build that you can play, especially if you're new to the class or to the game. So here I want to give you an updated version of that. And there are actually a few things that have changed now with this rework because they allowed a few mechanical changes as well. If you are in any way familiar with the old Shadows Mantle, it used to be some stationary face tank kind of build where you had to stack a lot of toughness and then vault exactly on top of the elite and try to kill it by just holding down the impale button. So it was usually kind of boring and not really, that much like counterplay against a lot of things. And this has actually changed now because you can play ranged versions of it, and you can also do AoE damage now with the over penetration rune, the cold version of the build that has an extra added 25,000% weapon damage now when you hit subsequent enemies. This change allows you to play a more mobile version of the build, run around and make pulls and mow them down with AoE damage. And also they buffed the chemical burn, the fire rune, to essentially just deal double damage compared to before. This fire rune is going to be the single target playstyle that we know from back in the day, but now you have the option to either play the single target version or the AoE version with the cold. Both of them seem to be very close in overall performance. Obviously, if you want to do any kind of Rift Guardian killing build, then you would go with the fire anyway because you only care about single target damage. But for the general solo push and solo speed farming variants, those seem to be very close, so you can kind of choose which one you like more. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the setups here. I made fresh new planners. We also have the updated Maxwell Season 25 guide that you might want to check out. But here are all the different setups. First we start with the non-season here on the top, and later here you'll find the Season 25 setups, including the soul shards. The soul shards don't really change a lot, but because of the Terror shard and helm kind of requiring you to have a lot of extra cooldowns in your build, you can actually fit in a few more things, something like Fan of Knives, Bladed Armor, and you can even drop something like Shadow Power to get an extra cooldown skill in there for more damage and damage reduction. So this is a choice that you can make in Season 25, but for the most part nothing really changes from them. You just have more power, more damage, more toughness, and you have the Essence of Anguish here, for example, to deal more damage as well. One really cool addition is the Essence of Anguish with the Death Blow explosion. So especially for solo speed farming, this is going to be very cool because you throw your knives with the big single target damage on one enemy and then they pop and spread this damage to all enemies around you. And this makes Impale actually extremely competitive on the Demon Hunter solo farming variants compared to God DH and Marauder Sentry builds. So you can actually play Impale now at a competitive level, and you can easily blast for like 120 plus of this once you have a proper character set up. So with the Season 25 stuff out of the way, let's jump into the actual setup here. So we have the Shadows Mantle with 6 pieces, or 5 with a Ring for a Granger. This one requires you to wear a melee weapon, so it is going to be the Kali's Point, which has huge impale damage and also allows you to get hatred back from impaling enemies again, so you don't really have trouble with resources. And we have the Holy Point Shot here that gives you 2 additional knives that will be thrown in like a cone AoE and also deal more damage. So these are the 2 core impale items that you will always have. The rest of the setup is actually fairly flexible, and that depends a bit on what exactly you're playing. So you see we have multiple setups here for stationary cold and stationary fire setups, and a mobile cold and a mobile fire setup. So the main difference between those is that in a stationary setup you want to play with Traveler's Pledge and Compass Rose to stand still, face tank things, and just try to mostly hit the one yellow elite that you're hunting most of the time and not really move very much because else you're gonna lose damage. On the mobile variants you don't have that, and instead you go with Squirts and Focus and Restraint and a Generator. You also have the Raps of Clarity here to give you the extra damage reduction, so this is actually a pretty good synergy. And this also changes the supporting set that you're going to use in those setups, which on the stationary setup is going to be Orgults because you don't have Raps of Clarity there, you're not going to activate it with any generator. And in the mobile version you will go with the Crimson, which also gives you some nice damage reduction and some extra damage that will help you out here. Aside from this, the Cold and Fire don't really differ very much, so essentially it's just changing the rune and changing the elemental damage rolls on your items, and the rest of the setup is going to be exactly the same. Just the playstyle is a bit different, because again, on the Cold rune you want to go more for AoE, and on the Fire rune you want to go more for those typical like yellow elites that you're hunting with shadows. You might be wondering, what about the Chain of Shadows? Isn't that like the Impale build? The answer is yep. So in those stationary setups, actually you're going to go with that, because there's not really that much else besides maybe a Witching Hour or maybe a String of Ears for toughness. But in general, you're going to be slightly more mobile here, because you actually drop that belt for those mobile versions, funny enough. But you have the Crimson that gives you extra resource cost reduction. You have extra resource cost reduction from your Soul Shard in Season 25. And in general, you will not really have too much trouble vaulting around if you don't waste your discipline all the time. The thing is that with those mobile versions, you can actually do damage on the move while kiting enemies, so you don't actually want to vault that much anyway. It's not like on the stationary version where you just go around and find an elite and then you stand there for a while. So you actually need to maybe vault like, multiple screens in a row. So the Chain of Shadows is quite useful there, but actually not that useful in the mobile version, because you will be kiting and stutter stepping. For your skill and passive setup, you want to go with Impale obviously, so you have either the Over Penetration or the Chemical Burn runes. Ricochet used to be my recommendation in the past, but this is kind of out now because you just hit so many more targets with the Cold rune. Grievous Wounds, in case you don't know, is also only just 330% weapon damage, which is the same multiplier that the Shadow 6-piece does, so it essentially adds basically nothing. And the Chemical Burn is extremely good for a single target, because this Chemical Burn also gets the Shadow 6-piece bonus, so essentially does the whole damage twice. Next up you have the Vengeance. You can go with Dark Art here because you don't need any extra resources, because Khalees takes care of that. Then there's Wall that you have in every version of the build for the mobility and to move into the right position. And the rest of the skills are actually fairly open. So most of the time you're gonna go Shadow Power, which synergizes with the Shadow set, gives you all the runes, gives you lots of healing and damage reduction, so this is very useful. And then you have something like either the Fan of Nice Bladed Armor and the Boar Companion or the Wolf Companion. You can even put a Sentry Guardian Turret in there. You can even put a Smokescreen Vanishing Powder in there. So there are actually like some options you can do, but this is most of the time what I would recommend. For the passives, the one you always want to have is Call the Weak and probably Ambush for the extra damage. And then it differs a little bit from the different setups. So in the stationary setups, you want to go a bit more tanky with Numbing Traps and potentially even Awareness. You can also do Leech, or you can do Perfectionist instead of Awareness if you don't really need a G-Def but you want to get more damage reduction. And in the mobile versions, you have the Thrill of the Hunt actually, so that you can slow enemies from ranged. In the stationary setups, you're mostly in the middle of the pool, so it doesn't really matter because you have the Bane of the Trap slow. But when you're at range, you don't really slow stuff that well, so this is actually required. And you can also play with Steady Aim for even more DPS. Your cube options are gonna be the Dawn in every single setup, and also the Ring of Royal Grandeur basically everywhere, because this allows you to combine the sets. And then you have the Armor slot, which it can be Stone Gauntlets or Aquila. So for stationary setups, you will have pretty solid Stone Gauntlet uptime, and this negative effect is ignored because you have Vengeance up at all times. So make sure you get permanent Vengeance with enough cooldown reduction. You need 37%. And in the mobile versions, the Stone Gauntlets is not really so great because you don't really want to get hit very much anyway. So you can go with the Aquila here. Lastly, a bit of talk about the legendary gems, because there's also quite a few options here. So the main one is going to be the Bane of the Trapped. So you're going to have this in basically every single variation of the build. And then you have two more options. So this can be either offensive or defensive. What I would recommend is Pain Enhancer and Bane of the Stricken here for stationary, for example, cold setup. But you don't really need Bane of the Stricken that much when you play fire, because you have double single target damage. So the bosses will usually melt quite fast, even on the highest pushing tiers. And you can go for a more defensive option like Esoteric Alteration, or you could even do something like Bane of the Powerful, or even Gogok if you need the extra cooldown reduction. For the mobile builds, you want to go with the Zaze here as the second option, because you're going to be at range most of the time, so you will be able to almost maximize this damage bonus. And again, for cold, I would recommend Bane of the Stricken, just to be able to kill a boss really fast. But if you're doing more casual pushing, it is not too required, because you can just dance around the boss, you will have good squirts uptime, and you're gonna kill it quite quickly anyway. So again, you could do something like Esoteric Alteration or Baneful Powerful here for more defense, and a bit of like an overall damage increase. And the same with the fire here, you don't need a Stricken yet again, so here we have the Go-Go of Swiftness, for example. The Speed GR versions and the RGK versions are not really much different, so usually like maybe Swap a Skill, or like the Cube here, for example, Stand Arduous Gauge and Molten Wildebeest is a pretty good combo to give you shields and keep up the Squirt's Necklace when you're doing speed farming. And if you want to do any kind of RGKing, which is not going to be part of the meta teams, but you can definitely kill bosses in GR 150 in a solid time, maybe 2-3 minutes or so. So you have the Stricken, of course, and you have like a much more like offensive setup with Witching Hour, and you just kind of like try to make a way to the boss and then blast it down. Since this is a Hades gift in Season 25, there's also some T16 setups here. So again, you want to go with this Death Blow Explosion for the Essence of Anguish. That's gonna like carry you quite easily. In T16, I would probably still recommend the Lightning Rune for Impale here, but the Cold Rune will also work fine. And there's a bit of a higher focus on like speed. So for example, there's the Restless Ring of Larceny and Pandemonium Loop for fearing enemies and getting the movement speed buff. There's something like what's like in Arm Guards. You can put in a Hot Pursuit from Hellfire if you have that. So there's some options like that basically to just speed up the farming, and it's going to be quite fine. And also the build is even strong enough that in groups you can go with the Canes and the Sage if you want to kill the boss. So you can do an item swap here at the boss and still kill it pretty fast, even without the 6-piece multiplier. For the playstyle, I mentioned most of it already. In general, when you play stationary setups, you want to walk around until you find a nice, especially yellow elite. On lower tiers, you can also try to maybe kill some valuable trash monsters here and there, or some blue packs. But in like the very high pushes, let's say GR 140 plus, it is gonna be very rough trying to progress on something that's not a good yellow elite, or some super small blue pack, something like Shadestalkers. When you have Elusive Ring in your setup, you have to make sure that you activate Vault at least once every 8 seconds, because else you're gonna drop the buff. If you play with Convention, which is like a higher Paragon option, then you don't really worry too much about this, but you're also gonna be so much more squishy in general, so you gotta be careful of that. For the mobile setups, you can like more freely move around all the time because you don't have endless walk, so you don't have to stand still to deal good damage. You can just activate your generator every 5 seconds to get the Rapture Clarity and the focus buffs, and then throw knives all the time, kite enemies around, and try to mostly fight the valuable targets that you find on the way. So here you're a bit more free to do DPS all the time, and you don't have to just vault around until you find the yellow. So you can also fight some blue packs here and there, just kite them with you, same with some yellow packs. But in both cases, you want to make use of Oculus Rings as much as possible. So you want to vault into them and then use them until they disappear for the most part, if you can survive. And even if you don't hit your main target, it's not too bad, because you get this huge extra bonus damage that will help you just clean up everything much faster. One important trick that you should use is the bottomless Potion of Mutilation snapshot. So with Shadow Power, you can snapshot this life per kill bonus effect from the potion permanently by using the potion and then activating Shadow Power. And the Shadow Power lasts forever, so we'll always have this life per kill bonus, and half of that is transferred into life per hit. So it gives you a massive extra life per hit bonus. You have to take note that when you level up or when you change zones, you will have to repeat the snapshot, or if you for some reason accidentally press Shadow Power during the run, you will also have to repeat it again with the potion. And that also concludes this guide. So Impale, while it's not really top tier, is looking pretty solid in Season 25 in particular. I'll be maining a Demon Hunter in this season anyway, so I'll probably try my luck with it as well on hardcore. Especially those ranged mobile versions are going to be quite interesting, I believe, because this is very different from how Shadows used to be played, and I had a lot of fun with this already on the PTR. So I hope you enjoyed this guide here. I wish you good luck in Season 25, and see you guys next time.